The wind cut sharp across the depot platform as the last of the daylight faded, carrying with it the cold silence of abandonment, the kind that sinks into a person's bones the very moment they realize the people they trusted most have turned their backs forever. And there, standing alone with nothing but a frayed shawl pulled tight and a small suitcase held close, was a young expectant mother whose eyes followed the silhouettes of the riders disappearing into the horizon, riders who once promised to support her, protect her, love her, but who had now left without hesitation, without mercy, without so much as a backward glance to see whether she would fall apart the moment they were gone. She stood frozen at the edge of the platform, one hand resting over the gentle curve of her belly as if trying to shield the life inside from a world that had grown suddenly hostile and cruel, whispering softly to the tiny heartbeat beneath her palm that everything would be okay, even though she had no idea how, or when, or if the words would ever be true. The depot was nearly empty, just a handful of travelers waiting for the evening train, none of them bothering to look her way for more than a second, each glance filled with curiosity or quiet judgment before sliding away as though her pain was something too heavy for strangers to witness. She could still hear the echo of harsh voices, the accusations, the disappointment, the finality of their rejection ringing louder than the rumble of the departing horses. She felt that rejection wrap around her chest like iron bands, squeezing tighter and tighter until she had to swallow hard simply to breathe. The shadows around her lengthened as the sun dipped behind the distant ridges, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds, and she realized she was now truly alone, alone in a place she didn't know, alone with no money beyond a few wrinkled bills, alone with a child on the way and no plan, no home, and no one left to turn to. She tried to steady herself by sitting on the cracked wooden bench, but her legs trembled, and when she finally sank onto it, she pressed both hands to her belly, whispering again, "I'm here. I'm here. I won't leave you," even though she wasn't entirely sure she believed her own promise. People moved past her, boots thudding on the platform, skirts swaying in the dry wind, voices murmuring about schedules and destinations, but no one stopped long enough to truly see her. She couldn't blame them. In their eyes, she was a stranger, a complication, a reminder of something they didn't care to understand. And in that moment, the weight of everything crashed down at once, fear, exhaustion, heartbreak, threatening to drag her under like a river current in spring thaw. The depot lanterns flickered to life one by one, casting soft golden pools across the dusty boards, and she pulled her shawl tighter as the cold deepened. She wondered whether she should buy a ticket, go somewhere, anywhere, but she didn't know what direction meant survival or what direction meant more sorrow. She had spent the last of her strength reaching this place only to be abandoned, and now the idea of stepping onto a train headed into the unknown felt terrifying. Her stomach tightened with worry. She thought of the baby, of the days ahead, of the possibility of labor coming early with no doctor, no warm bed, no helping hands. A tremor ran through her, not from the cold but from the truth she didn't want to admit. She had nowhere left to go. Her eyes burned with unshed tears she refused to let fall. She'd cried too much already, cried until her throat ached and her chest felt hollow. But as the night grew deeper, loneliness whispered cruel questions. What if no one helps you? What if this is the end of the road? What if no place exists where you and your baby will be welcomed? She closed her eyes tightly, fighting back the rising panic. She could not collapse, not now, not with a child depending on her. She forced herself to breathe deeply, slow and steady, even though her hands were shaking. She needed a plan, she told herself. But plans require options, and she had none. Then, faint at first, came the soft, rhythmic sound of hooves approaching from the darkening road, slow, steady, unhurried, like the steps of someone who wasn't racing away from responsibility but simply moving through life with purpose. She kept her head bowed, expecting the rider to pass without noticing her the way everyone else had. But the hoofbeats slowed, then stopped entirely. The gentle snort of a horse lingered in the air, followed by the quiet jingle of a bridle, and a shadow fell across her feet. She lifted her eyes and saw him, a cowboy standing a few feet away, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of presence that seemed carved from the same earth and grit as the frontier itself. His hat was tipped slightly forward, casting a shadow over eyes that watched her with neither judgment nor pity, but with a steady, grounded concern rarely found in strangers. Dust clung to his boots and coat, evidence of a long ride, yet his posture held an easy calm. He glanced at her suitcase, then at her belly, then gently met her gaze. "Evenin', ma'am," he said, his deep voice warm enough to thaw the cold around her. She gave a small nod but looked away, hoping the stiffness in her posture would signal that she didn't want attention, even though a part of her ached desperately for someone, anyone, to see her. The cowboy didn't move on. Instead, he stepped closer but not too close, giving her space as though he sensed how fragile she felt. "You waitin' on someone?" he asked softly. Her throat tightened. Words felt heavy, tangled, painful. She shook her head. "Not anymore," she murmured. The cowboy's brow furrowed slightly in understanding, but he didn't press. Instead, he glanced toward the road where the riders had vanished and then back at her with a quiet gentleness that pierced her more deeply than any cruel word. "Looks like you've had a rough day," he said. She let out a shaky breath, unsure whether she wanted to laugh bitterly or break down completely. "That's one way to put it." The cowboy nodded again, as though he had expected that answer. For a moment, neither spoke, and the depot sounds faded beneath the weight of the silent understanding between them. He shifted slightly, removing his hat with one hand and holding it loosely at his side. "I don't mean to trouble you," he continued, "but I couldn't just ride past seein' someone lookin' that lost." The sincerity in his tone disarmed her. She hadn't been spoken to with this kind of gentleness in a long time, not by family, not by strangers, hardly by anyone. Still, fear lingered. She had been abandoned once today. She wasn't sure she could risk trusting anyone else. "I'll be fine," she whispered, her voice thin. The cowboy looked at her for a long moment, really looked, and then shook his head slightly, not in disagreement but in quiet heartbreak. "Maybe you will," he said softly, "but nobody should have to face the world alone. Not like this." His gaze dipped once more to her belly, but it was not judgment, it was recognition, respect, even awe. "You've got someone dependent on you," he said. "Someone who deserves a fair chance." She swallowed hard. The words struck her deeply, carving through the numbness. She had been told the opposite so many times, told she had ruined everything, told she had made her bed and deserved whatever hardship came next. But here, from a stranger, came a softness she hadn't expected. She wanted to speak, to explain, to defend herself, but no explanation seemed necessary. The cowboy pulled in a deep breath, as though gathering his courage. "I've seen folks left behind before," he said quietly. "And I've learned that sometimes, fate puts us where we're needed most, even if we don't understand it right away." She blinked, confused. He continued, "I ain't here to judge you. I ain't here to ask nothing of you. But if you've got no place to go, I know a ranch a few miles west. Quiet place. Safe. Plenty of room. Decent food. A warm fire." He hesitated. "You and the little one, you'd be welcome." Her heart pounded. "Why?" she whispered. The cowboy lifted his gaze to hers, his expression steady, genuine, unflinching. "Because someone should care," he said simply. "Because no one deserves to be thrown away. And because, if you'll let me, I'll love you both." Her breath caught. The words were too shocking, too gentle, too kind to absorb all at once. She stared at him, trying to decipher whether he truly meant it or whether loneliness was distorting everything. But his eyes told the truth, warm, steady, unwavering. Not a grand declaration. Not a romantic line. Just a promise born from a heart capable of compassion deeper than anything she had known. She felt tears rising, unbidden and uncontrollable. She pressed a hand to her mouth to stop a sob from escaping. The cowboy stepped closer but kept enough distance to show he wasn't trying to force anything. "Not today," he added softly. "Not tomorrow. Not any faster than you're ready. I'm sayin', you ain't alone unless you choose to be. There's a place for you. A future for that little one. And I ain't runnin' from either of you." His words washed over her like warm rain after a long drought. She glanced at the empty road where her past had ridden away, then at the cowboy standing before her, a stranger offering more kindness in 5 minutes than her own blood had offered in years. Something inside her broke, but not in a painful way. It felt like a wall collapsing, like chains falling away, like the first breath after being underwater too long. She nodded, barely at first, then fully, tears slipping down her cheeks unchecked. The cowboy gave a small, relieved smile, lifted her suitcase without end stories. Make sure you subscribe to the channel.